Now we need to spend a little bit more time talking about one of the organelles of the cell, known as the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. So we've already started to talk about it, but we need to go into more detail. What all makes up the plasma membrane and how does it work? Now remember we said that it kind of acts like the skin of the cell, or in our city analogy, it's kind of like a city wall or the city boundary. It decides what goes in and what goes out. But the thing is, we can't just have a solid wall. We can't just have a solid boundary where nothing can bypass, because the cell needs some things to come in, and it needs to get some stuff out. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and I want you to try to think on your own of a few things that the cell needs in and a few things the cell needs to get out. All right, hopefully you were able to think of some of these things. The cell needs to bring in food. It needs sugars, proteins, fats, salts, oxygen, water. All the things that your body needs as a whole is what each and every one of your individual cells needs as well. So what kind of things did you think of that the cell needs to get out? Well, it needs to get out waste. It needs to get out the garbage, such as ammonia, excess salt, carbon dioxide, and excess water. Okay? So the same things that you need to get out of your body, that each individual little cell in your body needs to get that stuff out too. So this creates a little bit of a problem. So we need a boundary to separate it. But the inside of the cell is made up mostly of water. And the outside of the cell is made up mostly of water. So how do you keep water from mixing with water? Do you know of anything that doesn't mix with water? Hopefully you said, yeah, fats, oil. Oil doesn't mix with water. It floats on top. Like if you've ever cooked bacon and then you put the bacon pan in soapy water, all the bacon grease just sits on top of the water. It floats. It doesn't mix in. So we can use lipids. We can use fat and oil to separate water from water. So let's zoom in on this plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is made up mostly of lipid. It's made of a special lipid called a phospholipid. It has a phosphate for the head, and then it has two tails. Okay, so another name for the cell membrane is the phospholipid bilayer. Because what happens is this phospholipid, the two parts, the heads and the tails, are a little bit different. Okay, the head is hydrophilic. It loves water. It loves to interact with water. But the tails are hydrophobic. They hate water. They fear it. They want to get away from water. So what happens is you get two rows of these phospholipids. Okay? If this area here represents the inside of the cell, which is mostly water, and this is the outside of the cell, which is mostly water, what we can do with these phospholipids is we can make two rows where you put the heads pointing towards the inside of the cell and the other row of heads toward the outside of the cell, because they like water, so they'll interact with the water inside and outside the cell. And then the tails you put in between the two rows of heads because it's hydrophobic. It hates water. So while they're in between this row of heads, these tails are protected from the water. And these tails push water away. So the water inside the cell stays inside, and the water outside the cell stays outside. So because of this phospholipid bilayer, we are able to separate water from water. Cool. So now we're able to create this barrier. We're able to separate water from water. Awesome. But the problem is we need some things to come in and out. This can't just be a brick wall where nothing can pass through. Because remember, we need to get food in and we need to get waste out. So we need to be able to make the membrane what's called semi-permeable. Okay? Semi meaning a little bit, permeable meaning able to pass through. So we need it to be semi-permeable, meaning some things can pass through, but not everything. Another word that you might hear for this same concept is selectively permeable, meaning the cell can select what is able to be permeable. It is able to select what can pass through. Okay? So we need control of what can go in and out. So then the question is, well, how do you do that? How can you control what can go in and out? Well, we're going to use proteins. Remember, the most important thing about a protein is its shape. So we can put proteins inside of the cell membrane, passing all the way through. So part of it pokes to the outside, part of it pokes to the inside, and they can act as doorways or gates for specific things to pass through. Because remember, it's all about shape. So the thing that needs to come in has to be the exact right shape. If it's not the right shape, it won't fit through the doorway. So in this picture down here, you can see these big purple blobs. These are the transport proteins. We've heard those words before. Okay, so you've got part toward the inside of the cell, part towards the outside of the cell, and then there will be a channel where it can pass through to go in and out, but only if it's the exact right shape to fit. Now, there's a couple of these protein doorways. Some have a very small opening that is open all the time, and only the exact right fit can pass through. That's what's shown in this picture here. It's always open. Okay, so this is like Walmart, always open, 24-hour access. Then you have other doors that they open and close. They're not always open. These are to allow bigger things to pass through, that if it was always open, the hole would be so big that lots of things can go through. So it will be closed until the exact right molecule fits in, and then it slowly opens to let in just that one molecule, and then closes right back up behind it. And we'll study those some more in the next few days. One last term you might hear this organelle called is a fluid mosaic. And that's because these proteins that are stuck inside of the phospholipids, they're not permanently stuck in that position. They sort of float around and move around in that phospholipid bilayer. So because they have that movement, that fluidity, that's why it's called fluid. And a mosaic, you may have seen artwork that is called a mosaic, where it's made up of lots of different things, such as stained glass windows are made up of a bunch of different stained glasses to create a picture. So that's why we call this a fluid mosaic, because it's made up of lots of different proteins inside the phospholipids. Okay, so we've got a lot of names for this organelle. Make sure that you know them and that you know that they're all talking about the exact same thing when you hear them. Cell membrane, plasma membrane, phospholipid bilayer, and fluid mosaic.